Texas sure is magical.
You know, I actually can't think of a more succinct metaphor to open this video with. You guys like SpongeBob, right? Don't answer that. It's not really a secret that SpongeBob's glory days have been over for a very long time, but I tend to look at the large number of grown adults foaming at the mouth about how the new episodes are bad and that it's dishonoring the memory of Steven Hillenburg the same way I look at a Kick streamer's Death Note. Like, I'm not surprised, I'm just really disappointed. There's only so many times I can hear modern SpongeBob bad, Hillenburg would have hated this, and security system takes control of Squidward's house before everything really loses its impact. I don't know where I was going with the Kick streamer analogy. I personally think all of them should be forced to mine lithium for eternity. Like, realistically, what do you expect Nickelodeon to do? SpongeBob has always been their most popular show, ignoring that little incident in 2016, and like it or not, it was always going to outlast Hillenburg, as sad as that is to acknowledge. If the show is bad now, it's not because they're spitting on his legacy or anything, the show is just bad. Also, Hillenburg did not hate spin-offs and knew about Camp Coral. I got a video about that if you care. But why have I started with all of this? Well, it's because the subject of today's video made me throw all of my nuanced viewpoints about SpongeBob, I think that sentence has permanently banned me from sex, out the window entirely. And guys, I don't think I can stay on my high horse if it's not that deep anymore.
I want that sponge! Look it. It's SpongeBob!
Saving Bikini Bottom, the Sandy Cheeks movie, makes me feel the same way as when I'm writing in my own Death Notes. Look, SpongeBob has had some low points, like really low points, but no matter how bad the show got, it never paralyzed me with visceral hatred the way this movie did. This is how low the bar has gotten. This is the bottom of the barrel. And let me just say, it truly takes a lot of effort to make something worse than the episode where Plankton tries to off himself. What could have been an interesting spin-off to give Sandy more of the spotlight ends up being the absolute worst, most insufferable product to come out of the SpongeBob franchise. And I'm not content with keeping this pain to myself. I wish to share it with all of you, assuming you haven't seen it already because the movie leaked months ago. Holy shit, not even the interns wanted this. So please sit back and observe, because this movie goes to some cursed places I wouldn't even approach with a gun. And I'm not talking about Texas. Oh god, SpongeBob, no, the Dan Schneider documentary was only 3 months ago! Let's get started. One thing you're immediately going to notice about this movie is that it has a serious problem with shutting the f*** up. SpongeBob as a show isn't renowned for being quiet, heck, that's the last thing I'd describe it as, but there is rarely a single second in this movie where it isn't trying to overstimulate the viewer. And I get it's for kids and I'm a grown man now, but if the original show is still beloved by kids without trying to get their ADHD in check, then I don't see why the Sandy Cheeks movie constantly has to have someone screaming, yapping, voice lines overlapping with each other, and an addiction to unnecessary sound effects so bad it could sedate Has-Been Hotel. Another thing to mention is that this movie is an animation live-action hybrid movie, and it's very evident which of the two received the most care and attention. The animation throughout the movie is actually okay, opting for a similar visual style to Sponge on the Run, though clearly not as polished. I actually really like how Sponge on the Run looks, and I think it's a perfect 3D translation of SpongeBob's art style, so seeing the lack of extra polish with the lighting, posing, and cinematography, as well as the frame rate being different, is a little disappointing. But at least the animated segments had more effort put into them than the live action, because what the f*** is happening in this image? Also, all the live-action performances are beyond awful, even for Nickelodeon standards. Usually I don't focus on Nickelodeon acting, since it's usually child actors who are trying their best, but these are all grown adults, so I'm gonna be a dickhead. It really feels like they just smashed the live-action Nickelodeon original series into a SpongeBob movie, and regardless of how you feel about the previous movie's live-action segments, they were not even close to this level of awful.
This thing, oh, the boss isn't gonna like this.
Oh right, the story, this movie has one of those.
Stop teasing me!
Pick that up and pay for it.
One day, out of nowhere, the entirety of Bikini Bottom is scooped out of the ocean by the laboratory that Sandy works for. You know, the people that sent her to Bikini Bottom in the first place to do sciencey stuff. What's that? You didn't know that? Well, by all accounts, it's mostly a retcon. Different company entirely, completely different staff, now with nefarious intentions, but I'm not gonna hold that against the film just because they didn't adhere to this one episode from season 4. If anything, the fact this movie focuses on Sandy's background and her origins in Texas at all is a great idea. Let's see how they screw it up. It turns out since Sandy's been gone, there's been a lot of big changes to the company, including them now having a water park attached to their headquarters, all spearheaded by whoever this is. One second. Tsunami. Wow, aren't you just so clever? And they intend to use Sandy's research on the Bikini Bottom inhabitants to create clones of said inhabitants, then mass produce them and sell them as pets for kids. Now, if you're thinking,
What?
Then you're correct, and it only gets weirder too, as Sue's entire reasoning for it is explained in possibly the most uncomfortable and creepy way you could imagine. Going on about how much she— okay, hold that thought, I know you guys are saying this too, what the fuck is this? Did the budget hit a brick wall? Were the special effects guys too busy playing face raiders? What was the point of getting a child actor to play a younger version of this character if you're just gonna goofily slap her face onto it and poorly keyframe it so it stays in place? Look at how the keyframing is. I'd submit this as a first draft in a YouTube poop collab, not an official Spongebob movie on Netflix, and the visuals just add to how creepy this character is, and not the good kind of creepy.
She wished she could take them out of the water so she could cuddle and sleep with them.
You belong in a cell. Now, you know how Nickelodeon currently has this reputation for being insanely creepy and weird, even if that sometimes isn't the intent, especially of how they've been getting rightfully cooked this year for the treatment of their child actors. This movie genuinely borders on parody of how often it conforms to the stereotypes surrounding this company. And while it doesn't get as bad as literally making the child actor from Lincoln Loud wear a sodding diaper on camera, this movie is constantly on some serious freak shit. Like, what if SpongeBob was called Freak Bob and he ate ass and sucked toes? Speaking of SpongeBob, I think not being the main character for a change is starting to take its toll on the poor guy. There have been complaints about how newer seasons heavily flanderize SpongeBob from being energetic and childlike but still kind and emotionally intelligent to an insufferably loud toddler with the IQ of tinfoil. But my god, the Sandy Cheeks movie really makes you feel like Squidward. There is not a single thought in SpongeBob's brain throughout this entire movie. He spends the whole movie delivering corny one-liners, laughing at basically every line of dialogue, screeching like a maniac, and just generally being really weird. There is something wrong with this guy in this movie. From him laughing an unnatural amount at anything anyone says, to him literally sniffing a pile of shit and enjoying it, choosing to start tickling random people's feet in a swimming pool while laughing like a maniac. Like, he is a freak in this movie.
This place has more legs than Squidward!
He also adds shockingly little and is only really here for the purpose of having a small character arc where he learns how to whistle at the very end to summon Sandy's family. Alright, yeah, this is Sandy's movie, we should talk about that a bit. With Bikini Bottom gone, it's up to Sandy and SpongeBob to save the town and bring it back underwater, and that means the characters are finally going to Texas. I get that this isn't actually their first time doing it, but the movie doesn't care, I don't care, this is an episodic cartoon that's been going for over 20 years. If you genuinely care about SpongeBob's continuity, I think you're a virgin. Yarg, a woman! Sandy and SpongeBob get into a fight with some rattlesnakes. I'm so sorry. Only for one of them to bite Sandy and... Honestly, at some point you've really got to ask, Nickelodeon, is it intentional? Like, I know that some fetishes tend to come from slapstick gags people watched in cartoons as kids, and it's usually just innocently placed in to be funny, but when you consider this company's history along with the other weird shit in this film, it doesn't paint a very flattering picture. Why do I have to see Sandy Cheeks inflation in a movie where SpongeBob sniffs a pile of feces and starts tickling children's feet? I'm not the one being weird about this, you guys need to start explaining why this stuff keeps appearing in everything you make, because the guys down the street certainly ain't doing it as much as you do. Anyway, after being hit with the DeviantArt ray, Sandy is left immobilized and is forced to call her family for help. And yes, this is Sandy's family. Can't say much, honestly. For a movie specifically focused on Sandy, they really don't do a lot that adds to her as a character or explores anything about her. She just kind of fills the role of the protagonist and doesn't really have an arc. Like, she was in her family's circus and misses the spotlight a bit, I guess, and there's a bit of conflict with her struggling to choose the family she has in Bikini Bottom and the one she has back in Texas. It's not much of an arc, though, and by the end it all works out anyways. They all set up shop in Bikini Bottom. Usually if you give a character a spin-off adventure, you'd want to use that opportunity to, okay, away with the pretentious film critique, not do this! Do not make this movie! Sandy's family are honestly pretty pleasant characters though, not fleshed out obviously, their plot devices more than people and not very entertaining, but their scenes were some of the few moments where I wasn't outright scowling at my monitor. There is one scene that still leaves me scratching my head though, and it's when they're all having breakfast and tell Sandy that they're supportive of anything she chooses to do with her life, so long as it's in Texas and nowhere else. And this line came completely out of nowhere after just spending a long ass time introducing the audience to these characters and getting the audience to like them. And the way Sandy reacts to it suggests that that's gonna take the cliche route of her having conflict with her family over what she wants to do with her life. And I know what you're thinking with the way I'm setting this up, right? They're gonna subvert this somehow. Well, no, they actually take the secret third option of fuck that noise, and it's never brought up again. Go the cliche route if you wanted to, at least it would have been something. There's just a portion of dialogue here that they didn't cut out of the film after abandoning the idea entirely. What is the point of this exactly? There's a variety of scenes in the film that suggest the script was rewritten way more times than necessary and then they just never remotely refined it. The twister at the beginning that knocks SpongeBob and Sandy away from the water park somehow travels hundreds of miles within only a matter of seconds and completely takes them out of Galveston. The Cheeks family car essentially travels the entire f***ing globe in witch time whenever it's cold and can theoretically take them back to Galveston even faster than it took them to get knocked away, yet when they hit the road it's just a normal car, even struggling to outrun the goddamn police, and also for some reason seems to have like size fluctuating properties. What is going on here? Then there's some really cartoony jokes that just don't work in live action, like when Sandy and SpongeBob are being chased by a dog glide away from him and then they look back and he suddenly has a f***ing hand glider on him. Like, I won't deny it was funny, it just doesn't work in the setting. In terms of jokes, I think there was only two that I laughed at, one being the dog with the hand glider and the other one being this.
And they're free!
There's these two scientists who are supposed to be the bumbling lackeys for the villain. I've already forgotten her name and I don't care. And not only do they arguably get the worst jokes along with the villain, it's made 1,000 times worse by the fact that none of these people can act.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking?
Cringe. There's no other word I can use to describe it. It's embarrassing. Like, this isn't just bad acting, they just aren't acting full stop. The villain just, okay, going off actors' names now. Wanda Sykes is both trying to ham up her performance while completely under-delivering every single line, and I don't really know how to describe it. Also, Sandy was friends with the scientist somehow, and with the way they literally sided with Wanda Sykes just because she promised to fill their vending machine in the break room, I'm assuming they were both given forceful lobotomies in the time that Sandy's been gone. How are you friends with them? The entirety of this film's conclusion is just a clusterfuck of the highest order. Wanda Sykes revealed she was using Sandy's research to spy on the residents of Bikini Bottom to conduct her entire plan, and even though it's hammered in quite thoroughly that Sandy was tricked and it's not her fault, they still have everyone in Bikini Bottom shun her because the one thing in this film that's consistent with the rest of the series is that the residents of Bikini Bottom are assholes. Then Wanda Sykes gives her dumb backstory with the CGI superimposed head stuck on top of the body of a child, explains her weird fetish for sea creatures, then reveals that she's actually a cyborg. What the fuck? Then she clones SpongeBob into a million mini-bobs and SpongeBob encourages Sandy. Sandy breaks out. Thompson and Thompson decide they don't want to be evil anymore and then spend the next 10 minutes doing essentially nothing. Then Sandy decapitates Wanda Sykes, which... What was the budget of this f***ing movie? And her head lands in the tank for her mutant CGI fish pet who eats her, and then she suddenly possesses the fish and is sticking out of its mouth, and because she loves fish so much she's finally happy. What compelled someone to write this movie? My god, why is this movie so weird? SpongeBob is a weird show as is, but I have no idea what they were cooking here, and I'm kinda struggling to joke about it. It's so bizarre to look at. Then there's a crack in the dome and SpongeBob completes his character arc of learning how to blow a whistle. Why was he even in this movie? And Sandy's family come to the rescue. They launch out of Texas into fucking space. The screenwriter of this movie was on their crack pipe apparently, and they all fall back down into the ocean. Bikini Bottom is saved, Sandy and her family don't drown somehow, and the movie ends with Sandy rejoining her family's circus, now doing shows underwater. Also, Squidward is bisexual. The end. I am still struggling to process the fact that this is a real SpongeBob movie. It lacks so much of what made the series so good to begin with. Like, even the show today has traces of the first 3 seasons' DNA and still cranks out the occasional good episode, even if a lot of it ends up being nostalgia bait slop. Despite being about Sandy, the movie really could have been about anyone in the SpongeBob cast going on a mission to save Bikini Bottom, because the stuff revolving around Sandy just isn't interesting. I don't care that we know her family now, I don't care that she was betrayed by the company she works for. There could have been a legitimately fun story here, but they just don't do anything with it. And the one hint of there being something in this story just ends up being an unfinished plot thread that was left in the film by accident. None of the jokes are funny except this part. SpongeBob is an irritating and pointless addition who serves no purpose other than marketing the movie because the glowing brain geniuses at Nickelodeon decided against putting his name in the title for some reason. Sandy Cheeks' A SpongeBob Story would unironically be a better title. This movie is filled to the brim with so much weird shit and it couldn't have possibly been released at a worse time for the company. Every scene in live action was a nightmare to stomach. Like, who was this movie made for? Because modern SpongeBob, quality aside, still knows it has an audience of all ages, and sometimes caters specifically to the older crowd who remember the old seasons of the show. The only crowd that are going to be entertained by this movie are extremely young kids. Like, we're talking toddlers. And I think as a SpongeBob movie, it absolutely fails by aiming for that demographic. Or maybe they weren't aiming for that demographic. Maybe the movie is just that bafflingly incompetent that it forsakes everything remotely appealing about SpongeBob as a franchise for an ADHD sedation program. We will never know. Just an absolute train wreck. I would take the Splinter over this any day of the week. And as much as Sponge on the Run has its lifelong ops for some reason, some people really seem to have a problem with it being inoffensively made and going against the series continuity of the Camp Coral stuff, to the point where they genuinely consider it to be a slight towards Hillenburg and won't even let the movie honor his name at the end.
Yo, I'm gonna let you finish, but ding dong.
Like, I gotta say it, as bad as this franchise ends up being at times, it being bad is not an insult to Hillenburg. It is not that deep. Point being, I would take Sponge on the Run a million times over just so I don't have to watch this movie again. As far as SpongeBob content goes, this is a new low. And while I think people over-exaggerate the low points of this series, I have stared into the pits of Tartarus, and the devil smiled back.
Whoa, he's bisexual. I didn't know that.
By the way, I'm bisexual. I forgot.
Anyway, that's the end of the video. Play Yakuza or something.